Abdul al-Said. I think a lot of people know who the Ayatollah was, okay? Because the American
people know who the Ayatollah is. Nobody knows what you're talking about. Take out
the world's leading state sponsor of terrorism. Abdul al-Said is an Islamist sympathizer who is running for Senate.
You want to talk about the Senate candidate in Minnesota who's just accused of beating his wife and is no longer allowed to see his kid? Because I don't hear you talking about that.
Why don't we talk about the Senate candidate in Maine who has a Nazi tattoo?
Ever since the reported assassination attempt on Donald Trump, there's been this constant narrative floating around online that the hostility and political rage in America are equally coming from both sides. You hear people repeat it everywhere, that both parties are just as aggressive, just as extreme, and just as toxic as each other. But this panel discussion tells a very different story. As the conversation keeps unfolding, one of the Republican commentators completely loses control on live TV. What starts as a political debate slowly turns into shouting, insults, and pure frustration because he can't handle the pushback coming from the other side of the table. By the end of it, the entire exchange becomes so chaotic that the host practically has to shut everything down. Watch the full clip all the way through, and afterward I'll give you my honest thoughts. Don't forget to subscribe, like and share the video, and comment below where you're watching from.
The Kamala Harris campaign, Mike Nellis, Democratic strategist Madeline Somerville, and Vice President of External Affairs at the Manhattan Institute, Jesse Arm. But first, we begin with News Nation's Kelly Meyer live from the White House. Hey, Kelly.
Hey there, Lauren. So President Trump tonight, he's making a quick trip to Florida before the White House Correspondents' Dinner. So he's at an RNC fundraiser tonight and speaking at a cryptocurrency conference tomorrow before heading back here to Washington, D.C. Now, we've seen the president easing back into the campaign trail with a focus on the midterms and domestic issues as the cost of his war in Iran grows, especially for drivers. And even though he's dispatching his son-in-law and aide to Pakistan, gas prices remain high, and the Treasury Department today slapping dozens of shipping firms with sanctions and a Chinese oil refinery for doing business with Tehran. And even tonight, Lauren, I'll say, the president posting on Truth Social about renovations to not only the reflecting pool here in Washington, D.C., but the fountains across the street from the White House. So still focused on his past life as, manager and doing businessman and construction here in D.C.
Lots of action. Kelly Meyer, thank you so much. With me now are Mike Nellis, Madeline Somerville, and Jesse Arm. Mike, let's start with you. The midterms, okay, maybe they're not going to be a complete layup for the Democrats. I saw this new piece in The Hill titled "Democrats Worry They May Be Taking the Wrong Lesson from Recent Wins." Some Democrats are warning that backlash against President Trump does not necessarily mean support of their policies and rhetoric. So what are your thoughts on that, Mike?
Well, I think it's going to come down to the individual candidates who are running in their district, and Democrats have done, in my view, a pretty good job of recruiting some great candidates. The Republicans are giving us a lot to work with here.
I might take issue with you there.
Well, that's fine. We could disagree on that. But at the end of the day, the president's approval ratings in free fall. Gas is unbelievably expensive right now. And Donald Trump promised that he was going to make everything less expensive, and he hasn't done that. And so he's spending more time tweeting about the big, beautiful ballroom that he's going to build in his presidential library and the arch he wants to build. And I think the average American's pretty well upset about the way the economy is right now and the way the government's functioning.
Yeah, Jesse, to make matters worse for the president, several of his former supporters, we all know them, are now turning on him because of the Iran war. Jesse, your thoughts on whether the podcasters are doing actual damage?
No, I don't think the podcasters are doing much damage. I think the podcasters represent Podcastistan. They're sort of in their own island. Theo Vaughn was a Democrat up until 5 seconds ago. You had him up on the screen recently. Joe Rogan isn't really emblematic of the MAGA base. And I take issue with one thing you said earlier, Lauren. You said there's no comedian going to be present at the White House Correspondents' Dinner. But we've got Donald Trump, the funniest man in America.
Yes, even when I don't want to laugh, I do often laugh at the things he says. Yes.
Well, I think the Iran question is obviously still up in the air. It's a very kinetic situation. Things are still moving. Things are still fluid. And if Donald Trump is known to do anything, it's that he's willing to kind of flip the table and see where things land. So there are going to be a lot of big, bold actions that happen between now and the midterms in November. I disagree with the point from prior that Democrats are recruiting the top candidates that they can to run in November. Abdul al-Said, as one example in Michigan, running around the state campaigning with a guy who said America deserved 9/11, and Hassan Piker is one such example. And I think that time will tell. Things are going to change. Polls are not predictive. They are snapshots in time.
Yeah, good point, Madeline. Sticking with the Democrats, if they're able to take over the House this November, and they're probably very likely to, many are hoping they'll prioritize affordability. But Axios is reporting a group of House Democrats is now pushing for day one impeachment votes if they do take the House. So, Madeline, I mean, how does that sit with voters? Are they sick of this Trump impeachment effort that seems to be ongoing?
So I think the more relevant question actually is, how does this sit with the independent voters that the president has just recently lost? And I guess it's not even recent. It's the charts are tracking it since right after the Doge cuts, and then right after the October split last year. I think that the focus needs to be on those voters in particular, because what's going to happen is for the midterms, right, those folks are going to be those high propensity voters and turn out because they care about it. Those are the ones who are going to be excited about impeachment, and the other ones are going to stay home, and that's going to be the problem, right? If the Republicans are not able to reactivate that base with whichever candidate they decide to run, then those people who switched over in order to run, or in order to vote for a candidate rather than stay home, like the Gen Zers and the general independents, those guys are gone, and they delivered the election for Trump. So if they can't get a candidate that's going to motivate them, they're done. And I think that that's really going to be the motivating factor. I know we talk a lot on the show about Democrats needing to inspire people and Democrats needing to run a great candidate. I don't think they've found one yet, first of all, but I think that it really is going to be voting against versus voting for.
Mike, I want to get your take on that really quick. Do you see things any differently?
I mean, I see things a lot differently here, if I'm being honest with you. The first point on the podcast, bros, for a second, is that Joe Rogan and Theo Von and the rest of them were a huge part of Donald Trump's election victory. And I think
yes, because the independents watched it. It's an apolitical
exactly.
space.
And let's talk about independents for a second, because Donald Trump is more unpopular with independent voters than Richard Nixon was at the height of the Watergate scandal, and George W. Bush was at the height of the Iraq wars on popularity. And there's a lot more independent voters today. And the number of people who are identifying as MAGA or Republican voters is shrinking by the day. So when Donald Trump talks about how high his approval rating is with MAGA, it's a smaller slice of the pie. So even if Democrats run bad candidates, or maybe not the most ideal candidates, which I don't think is what's really happening effectively on the ground, I think Democrats are basically as close to a lock as you can be right now today.
Is Abdul El-Sayed an ideal candidate? Is that your view?
Abdul, listen,
Hold on, let Jesse jump in really quick.
Abdul El-Sayed.
Before he does that, can I finish my point? Because he interrupted me for just a second.
No, you can't. I'm going to jump in one second.
No, I don't think you get to just decide doing that.
Abdul El-Sayed is an example.
Hold on.
No, you want to grab on to Abdul, but he's not even the front runner in the race. This is what Republicans do. They pluck somebody out of the race and they go, I'm going to talk about this Democrat, but he's not the one who's actually going to win that primary, most likely.
What's actually happening is independents heard all of that and they don't care.
Madeline, hold on. Jesse, now you.
Abdul El-Sayed couldn't decide whether he should issue a statement about the killing of the Ayatollah.
Nobody knows who Abdul is in this conversation. You're just plucking stuff out.
Hold on, let him finish.
Sad.
Abdul El-Sayed. I think a lot of people know who the Ayatollah was, okay? Because the American
people know who the Ayatollah is. Nobody knows what you're talking about.
The world's leading state sponsor of terrorism. Abdul El-Sayed is an Islamist sympathizer who is running for Senate.
You want to talk about the Senate candidate in Minnesota who's just accused of beating his wife and is no longer allowed to see his kid? Because I don't hear you talking about that.
Why don't we talk about the Senate candidate in Maine who has a Nazi tattoo?
This is the problem.
Why don't we talk about all the Nazis in the Republican Party? You guys keep hiring them. They have to fire them out of the White House.
I would be happy to. I'm not going to sit there and defend them. I was just talking about Tucker Carlson.
There's a huge problem on the far right and the far left with some anti-Semitism that's brewing on both sides, and it needs to be rooted out. Okay, I want to move.
No, you don't agree. You're not willing to call it out on your own side. I agree,
and I call it out on my own side all the time.
But you're a dishonest partisan hack. Okay, who are you willing to call out on your own side? Who's an anti-Semite on the left? Who's an anti-Semite on the left?
Why are you screaming right now?
I'm asking you a question. Please answer it.
What's the question again?
I'm screaming at you. Name one anti-Semite on the left if you're willing to call it out in your own party.
I mean, there's plenty of people online. I mean,
call one out in general, you're going to regret this conversation.
Excuse me. Are you willing to call it out on your own side or not?
Are you willing? Are you willing to admit that this president is a complete failure and this is the best you have?
Like, excellent points of disagreement that are very important and interesting to our viewers.
This panel was supposed to be a debate about elections, voter frustration, Trump's political problems, and whether Republicans are losing support with independents after the Iran situation. But the second the conversation became uncomfortable, one of the Republican guests completely abandoned the discussion itself and turned the entire segment into a shouting match. Instead of defending his position calmly, he started talking over people, throwing accusations around, demanding answers while refusing to let anyone respond, and creating so much tension that the host had no choice but to redirect the conversation before the whole thing collapsed. And to me, moments like that don't happen in isolation. People absorb behavior from the political environment around them. When influential leaders constantly insult opponents, attack journalists, mock anyone who disagrees with them, and treat criticism like a personal attack, eventually that attitude spreads outward. You begin seeing supporters approach every disagreement like a war that needs to be won rather than a conversation that needs to be had. Another thing that really bothers me is how criticism of Trump keeps getting deliberately twisted into something else entirely. Disagreeing with a politician is not the same thing as wishing violence on them. Opposing somebody's policies does not mean you support harm against them. Those are completely different things. And I think a lot of people intentionally blur that line because it's easier to shut down criticism that way instead of actually responding to what's being said. What this clip really exposed more than anything was how emotionally unstable political discourse has become. Everybody claims they want debate until somebody says something they don't like hearing. Then suddenly the conversation turns into yelling, personal attacks, and chaos. Anyway, those are my thoughts after watching that exchange. Let me know what stood out to you the most down in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe, like the video, and share it around. See you in the next one.